Hello and welcome to the Center for Military Modernization, Warrior Maven. I'm Chris Osborne. We're joined today by a leading expert in missile defense, military strategy, Mr. Tim Morrison, who's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and also served as a deputy assistant to the president on national security. So we're glad to have his expertise. It's something our viewers and readers are very welcome to hear. And my question to you today is, with all this attention on Ukraine, there is likely still, you mentioned this earlier, there is a need not to forget about China and their nuclear modernization. Not long ago at an MDA conference, sure enough, Admiral Richard, who's in charge of Strategic Command, said that satellite photos were showing silos, ground silos being built within mainland China. They're known for these road mobile ICBM launchers, but the notion that they're expanding in the face of discussion about potential agreements to slow down proliferation, they are rapidly expanding their nuclear modernization, with the number of warheads, according to the Pentagon's report, almost doubling or going up exponentially. You would know a lot about this. What's your estimation of what that threat looks like and why the Chinese are in such high gear to massively upscale their arsenal?
I think a lot of it, Chris, goes back to who Xi Jinping is. There's a lot that's been written about his comparisons between himself and Chairman Mao, the kind of imprint he had on China. When I was in government, we got a lot of criticism from people outside for why we were talking about China and China's nuclear weapons. And of course, since we started emphasizing that in the Trump administration and around the 2019 timeframe, so much more has become known. The hundreds of new Chinese ICBM silos, for example, the Department of Defense report last year, the 2021 report that talked about China possibly being up to 1,000 nuclear weapons by the next decade. We saw this in the Trump administration, and we really became worried about this idea that nuclear arms control would continue to be a bilateral question between the United States and Russia, that there was really a new player on the field, and that was China. And that's difficult for a number of reasons. One, a lot of the tools we use, like arms control, have always been a bilateral question. Well, now it has to be a trilateral question. And of course, we're seeing playing out right now, the opening ceremony of the Olympics, who's there sitting next to General Secretary Xi, but Vladimir Putin. So we may be in a tripolar nuclear arms race where Russia and China are teamed up against us. That is something we never had to deal with, even in the darkest days of the Cold War. So yeah, we really have to pay attention to what China's doing, because the problem is we may not know why he's doing what he's doing. Is this all about Taiwan and pushing us out of a Taiwan confrontation? Is it about trying to push us out of East Asia? We don't know, but we know we have commercial and security interests in Asia. And we know we can't allow Xi Jinping to continue to try to rewrite the rules of the international order that's existed since the end of World War II.
Excellent, excellent. Well, a couple of years back, in the earlier phases of the ground-based strategic deterrent maturation process, the new ICBM, Air Force plans to acquire as many as 400. General Weinstein, who runs that program, talked about the paradox of strategic deterrence, and I'd love your thoughts on this. The idea of constructing weapons so as never to use them, essentially keep the peace. He cited a philosopher that I believe I've mentioned to you before, Mr. Brody, years ago, who talked about the idea, almost the irony of, for the first time in history, potentially, engineering a weapon not to use it. So how key is this need to build up, maintain that GBSD program, make sure that the Trident gets updated, and make sure that nuclear triad is not only intact, but keeping pace with the world threats?
It's absolutely essential. It would be ironic for the United States to abandon its triad at the exact same time that China is building its own. This is the paradox of nuclear weapons. You mentioned we build them so that they're never used. General Hyten, when he was Stratcom commander, made the point that no, actually, we use these weapons every day. We use them every day because they deter major conflict. And great powers in an industrial and information age have the capacity to wreak unimaginable havoc and horror on the world. Millions could die in a major world war. And the reason we haven't had a major world war since 1945 is the advent of nuclear weapons. And so, I would just argue, we hope they're never used in anger. We hope they're never used in a in a military conflict, but actually nuclear weapons are used every day, and they make us safer. And it's not necessarily a question, get back to GBSD real quick. It's not necessarily a question of whether we think we need GBSD, although I think most credible thought leaders in this space think we do. It's also a question of what does Xi Jinping think, and what does Vladimir Putin think. And if they see us abandoning our triad and abandoning the GBSD program, what will that make them think they can possibly get away with? We have to really think about not just our adversaries, not just our own perceptions, also 30 some odd countries that are protected under our nuclear umbrella. What do they think for their security if we abandon our GBSD program? It's a responsibility we have that Russia and China don't. They don't really have allies. They don't have security guarantees with willing partners. We do, and I think we're better and stronger for it.
Roger that. Well, last question. You mentioned Russia, China, and as you point out, that does seem kind of new, doesn't it, in terms of a potential threat equation? There have been military to military exercises, if I recall, writing about some Chinese troops or some Chinese officials attending Russia's parade. There have even been some joint military to military operations, or testing, if you will, drills. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But lastly, one of the things that Mr. Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman, said is there does appear to be a tacit approval on the part of China for Russian activity in Ukraine. That seems very concerning. And my question is, while they're not likely to intervene in any potential conflict, what do you make of this tacit approval, and what kind of precedent might that set?
This is why I'm very worried about what happens in Ukraine, from the perspective of not just what does it mean for Ukraine, for the people of Ukraine, the security of Europe. What does it mean for Taiwan? What do our allies in Japan and Australia and South Korea think? Because, to be clear, we don't have a security alliance with Ukraine. Of course, they're not a NATO ally, but we did sign the Budapest Memorandum back in 1994. Ukraine gave up what would have been the world's third largest nuclear stockpile. And part of that agreement, the signatories of the Budapest Memorandum, was Ukraine's territorial integrity would be intact. So we have to think about what do our other security partners, including what do our allies think? If we walk away from an agreement like that, do they walk away from their confidence in our security guarantees? Do they feel like maybe the U.S. umbrella isn't as strong as it used to be? Maybe we need to make our own deals with Russia. Maybe we need to make our own deals with China. I don't think that leads to a safer world. So we have to really understand the long-term consequences of what I fear is about to happen in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. I'm sure our viewers and readers would want to hear from you for hours. I'd want to talk to you for hours. Let's wrap this up. I want to thank you, Mr. Tim Morrison, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, former Deputy Assistant to National Security to the President, talking about some key pressing issues here. We appreciate you joining the center.
Chris, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today.
Take care.